For National Women's History Month, we are talking to the executive producer of a Titanic exhibit that captures the stories of women who were on the Titanic. We are joined by Mr. John Zoller, who is the executive producer of Exhibition Hub, also of this exhibit, The Titanic, an Immersive Voyage. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks, Lissette. Pleasure to be here talking about the women of Titanic with you.
This exhibit has been all over the world, across the U.S., and you all are treating the stories of women in a way that I've never seen done in any other exhibit. Tell us about some of these incredible women.
So we wanted to highlight the passengers on board the ship, particularly the women who were so instrumental to the ship's story, and also were some of the survivors who really helped us learn the Titanic's story. Had they not survived, we wouldn't know anything about what happened that night in April 1912. So what we've done is we've created several boarding passes. A lot of them are women on board the ship.
Okay.
This one I have for you is Ida Strauss.
The spouse of the owner of Macy's.
Correct. And they had been on a long holiday in Europe, and they switched to Titanic at the last minute, thinking that they were so lucky to be on the newest, most luxurious ship, and then they experienced the worst maritime disaster in modern history.
And her story is so famous because she refused to get on any of the lifeboats. She said, I think her last words were to her husband, "Where you go, I go."
That's correct.
And she stayed with Isidore on the Titanic as it sank.
It's a very moving story, and there's so many stories like that. You know, we tell the story of Molly Brown. We were talking about Edith Russell, a fashion journalist, was covering the new fashions in Paris, and again had switched to Titanic at the last minute. She survived, and in the lifeboat that night, she had her lucky mechanical pig with her that she went back to her cabin to get, and the stewards were all upset. They were trying to get her into a lifeboat. But she then had her lucky pig, which for her helped her survive. But she used it to entertain the kids on board the lifeboat, so there was a little bit of distraction during that incredibly long night that they experienced before they were rescued by the Carpathia. You
all have captured the reactions of women and how they stepped up to do things during that moment of crisis that often history overlooks.
So we tell, for example, Molly Brown, she was key to that entire night in her lifeboat. She's the one who really kept the morale up. Everybody was freezing cold. She made everybody row in rotation so they could stay warm, could generate body heat. And she also was adamant that they go back and look for survivors in the water when everybody else on board the ship, on board that lifeboat, was afraid that if they went into that field that they would get swamped by potential survivors.
Coming from other areas, other cities and places, countries that have seen this, what has been the feedback from guests, specifically on these women's stories? So
there's a real connection that is created between people who come to the experience and the passengers aboard the ship. Part of it is the boarding pass that we talked about, but another way is that we put you in the lifeboat in the immersive gallery, and you experience those final moments of Titanic through 360 projection as if you're in the lifeboat. And again, the stories go to the women who survived, the women who were forced to be separated from their husbands. There was the rule of the sea, women and children first, but these were also very brave people who made that decision to save their children, to step away from their husbands, and then carry on their lives.
You brought some artifacts for us to look at?
I did bring some artifacts. So these artifacts have to do with the band that was on board the ship, and they famously played while the ship went down. They were in a tough position because they weren't passengers and they weren't crew, so they really didn't have an option to get in a lifeboat, but they really had a stiff upper lip and played the entire time. It's famously quoted that Wallace Hartley's "Nearer, My God, to Thee" was the last thing heard going across the silent waters as Titanic went down.
In the limited time that we have, you said something that I've never heard before, the tie-in between Tampa and our maritime industry and the area of the Titanic. Tell our viewers about that.
So obviously Tampa's got a long maritime history as a port city. Shortly after, almost immediately after the Titanic sank, an international ice patrol was set up that has patrolled the waters for the last 114 years since Titanic sank. And the Coast Guard cutter Tampa was one of the first ships commissioned to go and patrol those waters of the North Atlantic. And since that time that the International Ice Patrol was set up, there has not been another collision with an iceberg in the North Atlantic.
Well, congratulations, and thank you so much for putting your talents to this wonderful exhibition that tells the stories of women aboard the Titanic and their contribution to that moment in history.
Thank you, Lissette. And as we were saying earlier, I feel like I have the luckiest job in the world.
And we would agree in the studio. Thanks for coming in. For more information, you can go on the website you see on your screen to see and experience for yourself the Titanic, an immersive voyage.